liability and why your primary residence might not always be an asset.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic because a lot of people, or even a lot of realtors, will say, oh, your home is your biggest asset that you'll own. And that's actually incorrect because your primary residence is a liability. And the way, I think the simplest way of thinking of liabilities versus assets, liabilities cost you money, they're an expense, and assets make you money.
Mm-hmm.
So your primary home may become an asset for you if you hold on to it, turn it into a rental property, etc. But it does not start out as an asset. And so I think that is like something that we need to address in the marketplace, because if you're looking at your primary home as an asset, it could get you into trouble in the long run, right? So that's why it's like important not to overextend yourself when you're purchasing a primary home, because at the end of the day, it is a liability. And so you just want to be very mindful of that. However, I think it's important to think of like, how can this liability to me now become an asset to me later? And also, what are ways to make this liability more of an asset? And so we talk about house hacking all the time, right? And so I think that is something that especially like the millennial and after generations are a lot more conscious of, especially when it becomes more expensive to live here, about how to reduce my liabilities and increase my assets so I can build true wealth. And so we were looking at houses today, and there are homes that you can house hack and make money on. Mm-hmm. And that's really the best way to decrease that liability, is to be able to do that. But as far as like your personal residence being a asset, that's just not the case,
Well, and I think it can be misconstrued with, an asset to equity. I mean, people think, oh, it's
Yes.
an asset because I'm just building equity, and there is truth to that. It's better than renting. It's better than,
right.
The other routes, but equity doesn't always mean that it's an asset in the sense of what you're gaining. Yes, the longer you have it, the more equity, the more, if you do a construction loan or you do kind of a rehab loan and do all the things or build an ADA, that's always going to bring you equity, but it doesn't take away the fact that it still is a liability to what
right.
any creditor or anyone's going to look at in the future. And I think that goes to the point of where we're looking at now with rates, because as rates go up, you can't afford as much. Now is still a good time to buy, but it's still a liability and it's still a risk.
Right.
But if you can buy in this type of market as a liability, it can turn into an asset when you can refinance, or you can turn it into, like you said, a rental property or something like that.
Right. And I think that is it's what you're talking about, the equity, being and equity is awesome. Equity can change.
Always.
Right? And equity also doesn't bring you money every month.
Nope.
It's kind of like, the way I look at it and the way I explain it to especially first-time home buyers, your primary residence is essentially like a bank account that is just sitting there, and it can't really be touched. Mm-hmm. I mean, it can, right? We can do a HELOC or a cash out or whatever, but for the most part, as it sits there, it's accruing equity mostly, and it serves as like a savings account. Mm-hmm. And you don't really tap into that equity until you sell it, whereas an asset is something that's giving you money every month,
yep.
Right? And so it's like, if you have an investment property and your mortgage is $2,000 a month, and you make $3,000 a month on rent, suddenly now you're cash flowing on that property, and that's what makes it super lucrative and an asset. So I think that owning your home is still a great way to help you build wealth. It's just not an asset at that moment, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to help you either acquire other assets or become an asset in the long term. It's just not right now. And so it's just important to have that mindset. And for me, when I was reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, mm-hmm. I don't know if you read that yet, but
yep.
Nettie was actually had just read it, and so she was like telling me about it, and I was listening to that and reading that, and I was like, that it makes a lot of sense to put it that way, as like an asset is something that brings you money, mm-hmm. and a liability is something that costs you money. I think that's the best way to explain it, especially to people that are just getting into real estate investing, is like it. And like, I sold my first home recently that started out as a liability, right? It became an asset, and I turned it into a rental property, and then I sold it and bought another one, 2 doors. So it's like that makes more sense, that it's really an asset,
right.
Right. But my primary home, very much a liability.
I think the majority of the population, that is the liability. And we talk about this house hacking, and if you can just buy one put money into it, rent it out, buy the next one, or sell it, or however you wanna level up is how you can to acquire that asset. But it is a good way to explain it, to look at it, because that is a big misconception of people go, oh, well, I've got all this equity, so yeah, I've got the money, and it's like, but you really don't. And especially when we go back to rates, right now, to do a refi, a cash out, or even a HELOC, you're looking at above 9% interest rate, which is outrageous. Now,
Yeah.
back in the 90s, that wasn't outrageous, that
Yeah.
was a savings, but we're not in that time frame anymore.
Yeah.
And they're gonna continue to rise. But I mean, please follow our house hacking pages. We've got our Denver down payment assistance as well, but if you guys have any questions on anything house hacking related, how to make your liability into an asset,
Yes.
definitely reach out, because we're happy to answer any of those
Yep,
questions.
and we have great lenders that we can refer you to as well to kind of talk about those differences and help you maybe, like she said, turn that liability into an asset or make a plan to do so in the long run. So we'd be happy to help.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.